Uh, After the thought-provoking session by Professor Ainam this morning, let us now move on to yet another intriguing session on life, birth and right, aesthetics of intersubjectivity in contemporary Indian literature by Ms. Tanima Nigam. The session will be moderated by Richa Gupta. Let me introduce Richa first. Richa is the project manager for the John Monnet Center of Excellence at the Manipal Center for European Studies. She teaches courses on culture and literature at the center. Her doctoral thesis is on the work of the German novelist W.G. Sebald and focuses on the narrative methodologies of the writer in representing history and space in post-Holocaust Europe. Over to you, Richa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this particular session. Our next speaker is Tanima Nigam. Tanima, many of you already know her, but I will introduce her a little more fully. Tanima is a lecturer at Department of Philosophy, MAHE, where she conducts postgraduate courses on Indian and Western metaphysics, ethics, and aesthetics, along with skill-based courses on critical thinking and academic writing. She is also deputy in charge of academics and coordinator of the academic committee, as well as of the mentoring and counseling cell. She has attained her BA honors in philosophy from Lady Sri Ram College for Women from University of Delhi, while also serving as a teaching volunteer under National Service Scheme. After completing her master's in philosophy at Manipal Center for Humanities, she joined Manipal Universal Press as an editorial coordinator, where she oversaw content creation and editing activities, worked hands-on with authors, and managed a team of freelance copy editors. Alongside her editorial responsibilities, she was involved as a guest faculty and entrusted with the design and delivery of a course called European Literature in Indian Translation at MCES. Her areas of interest and specialization range across Indian philosophy in Nyaya, Vedanta, and Buddhism, hermeneutics, phenomenology, social anthropology, translation studies, and health humanities. Apart from this, she also nurtures a profound interest in fine arts. Welcome, Tanima, and this lecture, she will be delving into contemporary Indian novels. Tanima, over to you.
Thank you, Richa. Am I audible? Okay. So thank you, Richa, for that generous introduction. And I must say that I am very glad today to be sharing this stage with so many scholars when I'm just an early career researcher or just have started my research. And I must, on the same note, begin with a confession that the ideas that I'll be presenting here today are going to be an aspect of a very lengthy research that I have been trying to conduct for quite some time. And when I had the opportunity to present this on a topic for the winter school today, I thought of bringing up at least few important aspects of this topic into debate and opening it for discussion once, obviously, I'm done sharing my thoughts on it. So if you look closely at my title, it says aesthetic intersubjectivity. And there's a huge umbrella term at the end which says contemporary Indian literature, contemporary Indian writing. Now, what contemporary Indian writing I'm going to refer to? You know very well, there's a lot of contemporary novelists. There's Arundhati Roy, there's Madhav, and then obviously there are gender-based narratives and caste-based narratives. So to be precise, for today's session, I'll be referring to contemporary Dalit literature. And this is across the spectrum, across culture, across religion, written by different writers. So what we will be focusing on is certain philosophical observations that I've had in the course of reading literary theory as well as these literature in themselves. So now that we have that out of our way, now that we know what this Indian literature means in this particular context, let me move ahead by defining certain terminologies that we'll be making use of. And I think since caste is somewhat a sensitive topic, any caste-based writing or caste-based literature is a somewhat sensitive topic, it is obviously important that we define what kind of terminologies or what kind of words we'll be bringing into use. So let us first start with when I say Dalit literature. So our question would be, what constitutes Dalit literature? You could name few writers, authors, poets who have contributed to it. But my focus here is the word Dalit. Now, so perhaps some of you already know this, that how come Dalit as a word became the preferred mode of reference or of referring to, alluding to the oppressed, right? So in 1972, probably the first proper Dalit activist group, that was Dalit Panthers, writing in Marathi, Marathi Dalit literature, as well as writer activists who were constantly at the forefront of these caste-based debates, who revived Ambedkar's work, so on. They assigned this identity to themselves. Now, the key here is that this is a self-assigned identity. Historically speaking, when it comes to untouchability or untouchable individuals deemed as untouchable, thanks to the Varna system, usually they have been assigned words or names by other people. So there have been, obviously, we can start by the most obvious one, how Gandhi referred to them as Harijans. And before that, courtesy of the Varna system, they were either Atishudras or Avarnas, Panchamas, Achhuts, so on and so forth. Avarna, because they were not even considered a part of the fourfold Varna system. They were so much on the margins, on the periphery of the society, that they upheld the society, but at the same time, they were not allowed in the fourfold Varna system. So here we are speaking about people who have been historically on the margins. And the term Dalit is their first self-assigned identity, the name that they adopted for themselves. And second, it is also a democratic expression, the first ever democratic expression of their identity. So now moving on, there's one question that I often encounter, and even in the last semester, I was teaching this critical thinking course for a few master's students. And one question that I often encounter is, how is this question of caste still relevant? Does it still happen? Is it the case that people are still discriminated against? Is caste still an issue? Obviously, slavery or the oppression, untouchability was abolished with the Republic, with the Constitution of India. But at the same time, today we live in a world which may not be entirely aware of possibly what's going around them, especially if we find some time from our phones. So the question is, what is the relevance of the caste question for the contemporary world? Does caste still exist? Or is it something that only happens in those unsophisticated, so-called unsophisticated, primitive or village-like areas? So this is just a popular notion that I have seen many students or many people carry, that this doesn't happen anymore. And it's very similar to what many people in the upper middle class are going to say about dowry practices. Oh, this doesn't happen anymore. We are not those kind of people. But again, in subtle ways, it's going to penetrate into day-to-day life discourses. Now, so the first way to grapple this question, the relevance of the caste question, the first way to answer it is if there are still Dalit writers writing about this, if they're still narrating their experiences of humiliation, of exclusion, rejection, obviously this question is still relevant. There's a quarter of a country which is still expressing themselves, which is still narrating their life instances. And all these literature, whether it is Bama's or it is poetries of Hiraban Sode, all of these literatures are very recent. We're simply talking about a phenomena which is still pervading our day-to-day existence even today. Second way of going about this would be to somewhere consider these narratives for themselves. And a very good example I can borrow from this Dalit writer who is an associate professor in Jamia University in Delhi, who I happened to meet once during my visits. His name was Ajay Navaria. He was a lesser known writer, and honestly speaking, uninformed that I had not heard of him before. But he had published a host of works in Hindi on contemporary caste writings. He had a collection of short stories. It has been translated into English, and it's called Unclaimed Terrain. So there's a story by the name New Custom. Now, I'm not going to narrate the entire story. It's a short story, still it's a long one. It's a story of an erstwhile untouchable or a Dalit person who has education, who has money, who comes from a good cultured family background in the sense that his parents were educated, and he's also very modern in his thinking, in the sense that he has critical consciousness. He doesn't believe in objectifying women. He stands up to help the poor and needy, so on and so forth. At the same time, he has a specific realization of his own Dalit situation in the society. So this person, when he enters a new office space and when he travels, he takes a lot of care to dress in a hygienic, neat manner. He's scared. He's in his conscious, as so long as he's narrating his story, we also come face to face with his thoughts. And he says that the moment he starts conducting himself in a shabby clothes or in a shabby manner, in a dirty, unkempt hair, he will be judged as being an erstwhile untouchable. So, I mean, many of us can relate with it. It happens. And so this, as long as we're drawing from the narratives, I'm also looking at my day-to-day experience. Because come what may, you need only to consult your day-to-day experience to be able to find out these instances lurking right there. Now, so what we see in Ajay Nevaria's story, New Custom, is at one point in time, this narrator's caste is exposed. There's a huge misadventure which happens, and his caste is exposed. And right at that moment, his entire workplace starts treating him in a very different manner. He could feel their stares on him. He feels singled out. He's no longer invited to tea. He's no longer invited to eat with them. And there's a subplot, there's a subtext here where he's constantly thinking to himself, it was better when my caste was not revealed and they thought I'm an upper caste. So even with his critical consciousness, he's still thinking it was better if he was not a Dalit. So if you look at the title of the story, it's titled New Custom. It's very ironical. A custom is something which has been there for a long time, which has existed for a long time, which has been the usual, the convention. At the same time, there's word new there. So this is that old caste-based discrimination just manifesting itself in a new way, right? So I'll share one or two examples of this. Okay. So this is something from my personal collection. That's something I've always referred to. I think it's somewhere captures the contemporary caste situation in a very powerful manner. It says, in my student days, a girl came laughing. Our hands met kneading her rice and fish curry. On a bench, we became a Hindu-Christian family. I whiled away my time reading Neruda's poetry, and meanwhile, I misplaced my identity card. I noticed, she said, returning my card, the account of your stipend is entered there in red. These days, I never look at a boy and a girl lost in themselves. They will depart after a while. I won't be surprised, even if they unite. Their identity cards won't have scribblings in red. So let us take a moment to absorb this. So this is by S. Joseph. He's a very important voice in Dalit writing, specifically poetry. He writes in Malayalam. This has been translated. This is one from his translated collection. So the setting is a Kerala educational institution, Kerala state, which is, renowned for its educational accomplishments. So he enters a college life with somewhere, it promises freedom, equality. He meets a girl, they're sharing food, there's certain kind of anticipation, intimacy. And if we look closely at this, a Hindu-Christian family. So on a bench, we became Hindu-Christian family. Somewhere it shows that, the religious difference, the dark age of religious difference has already been discarded, left behind. However, accidentally, there enters something that is an identity card bearing the official record of his caste and the stipend the stipend he's eligible for based on his caste. So she leaves deceived, and he is numbed. So, and he's sort of holding this dark secret of modernity, this stigma. So what is ironical here, the very thing which is supposed to, that identity card, which is supposed to give him access to equality, education, freedom of expression, so on and so forth, that very thing has been the cause of his downfall, right? He feels singled out, he feels excluded. So the very identity card, which offers him a possibility of escape, stigmatizes him, mocks at his inspirations, and returns him to his humiliated situation. So he's shunned from the world of others. So if you look closely, that girl who's possibly upper caste or whatsoever her liberation is complete in some sense, that she has the power to sort of discriminate against him. Whereas this person, this narrator who has joined the college, his liberation is somewhere incomplete. His equality was somewhere feigned. It was just a garb. It was just a glass palace which was shattered the very moment. So, along with this, maybe we can refer to this as well. This is from Bama's autobiography, which is one of the mainstream works of Dalit writing. So there was this one instance in Bama's writing where she feels she, like any other, all the Harijan children or all the Dalit children in the class were constantly or frequently made to stand up, their names noted down, the amenities, the stipend that was supposed to be given to them was informed, and they were asked to sit down. So here she's narrating how difficult it was to, time and again stand as if, we've been singled out, we have done something wrong. All the same, now and then, our class teacher or PT teacher would ask all Harijan children to stand up, either during assembly or during lessons. We'd stand and they would write down our names and ask us to sit again. We'd stand in front of nearly 2,000 children, hanging our heads in shame as if we had done something wrong. Yes, it was humiliating. Right after this, she has narrated another incident where she enters college, a space for supposedly, advancement, some kind of broad-minded thought. And in that place, once again, she's made to stand, and there's a head count of Harijan children because they are supposed to be given some tuition. So, so there are few writers, contemporary writers, literary theorists, and one of them is Chandrabhan Prasad, who in his column used this very interesting insight that what we see in Identity Card in Bama's narration and in Ajay Nevaria's story is that it's a contemporary version or a contemporary form of untouchability. It has taken the form of exclusion from urban space. So earlier, I mean, we can say prior to this, we used to notice that, in a village community or in any society, um, Dalits have been made to live on the margins of or the periphery. They're not supposed to, sort of come inside the city. And this is something that will become very clear if you just have one reading of modern Indian literature, such as the work of Mulk Raj Anand and so on and so forth. So, the very contemporary form of untouchability is exclusion, not at the periphery of the society. You're not excluded to live at the periphery. You're involved in the urban life, yet excluded from him. You are a part of that public sphere in urban life, yet excluded from it. And if need be, we need only to consult our everyday experience. So why is that there are still families considering caste before marriage? Have you, and for instance, if you look at your day-to-day life, have you employed a housekeeping staff? And if yes, does your family or you ask them to eat, to take the leftovers, or ask them to eat in separate dishes, bowls, plates, and glasses? Or do you forbid them from using the washroom in your house? Do they always sit on the floor, or they take the chair? And this is something that we could possibly notice across households. And this is subtle ways in which the good people, the very good people today, would be excluding Dalits from the mainstream of Indian life. So, and further, once we read Bama's autobiography, we'll realize one more thing, that this caste question, even though caste system would have been involved, let's say, from the Varna system, but at the same time, this caste, the notion of caste is no longer limited to Hinduism as a religion. Bama clearly narrates that that even within the Christian church, there is enough discrimination and segregation that she has experienced, which she first joins the convent and then she ends up leaving it. So I'll just stop sharing my screen because that's all I had to show. Give me a moment. So this is why perhaps the caste question is relevant, speaking from a very non-academic, day-to-day lived reality perspective. But even within the academia, there's a widespread asymmetry between the debates about caste within India and the global representation of these caste-based debates. So one way to, account for this or further explain this would be, even though there is a proliferation of Dalit literature, and when I say proliferation, there always remember this, there are more literary works than you know, because there are so many works that have not been translated into other regional languages, let alone English. And it is only very recently, in the past 10 to 15 years, there have been certain initiatives such as Oxford Anthology and certain initiatives by Susie Tharu, Professor Susie Tharu from English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad, that there have been translation and collection of excerpts as well as poetry from different regional language. So there's always a widespread asymmetry, discrepancy between the number of literatures that are actually there and the number of literature which make it to a school or university curriculum. If this is the concern within India, that caste, has, been somewhat, has been on the margins. I mean, that has been the crux of it, has been on the margin, even in the Indian academia in some ways. In the global stage, in the global academia, most of the discourse is dominated by the subaltern studies, where the subaltern is largely the term used for the binary of colonizer and the colonized. Now, and what has not been perhaps taken into account, as Arun Prabha Mukherjee notes, that the representatives of the colonized the representatives of the colonized society are mostly from the upper middle class. So what we see here is Dalit, Dalit movement, a very important literary and political movement, which has somewhat to a great extent altered the face of Indian society. That is its importance within India. When India is represented on a global academic stage, what space or what situation, what kind of space has been assigned for, discussion of caste or Dalit debates for that matter? Is there is is there enough Dalit literary criticism taking place at the global level? Now, there can be several reasons for it. And one of the reasons which I have traced in my reading of history, I'm not sure if there's any other scholar who would connect it this way. This is the reason why I say that I have traced, is um, during pre-independence era, when India was still developing that freedom or independence consciousness, most of the by and large the focus was let's say the trend was nationalism, or specifically Gandhian nationalism. Now, in this nationalistic approach, the point was to show the colonizers, to show the British rule, that the entire India is a sort of united front against them. And in doing so, what was important was to gloss over the inequalities or the contradictions that exist within the Indian society. So in many ways, the Gandhi-Ambedkar debate, there's another session on Ambedkar, so I won't venture so much into it. In the Gandhi-Ambedkar debate was about this. Somewhere Gandhi's effort, for instance, to gloss over the inequalities which exist within the society so that we can be a united front against the colonizers. And second, at the same time, to somewhere believe that once we have that democracy, independence in place, we'll be able to solve these inequalities that come with caste, class, and gender, so on. So in some ways, this relegation of caste, gender, the internal inequalities within the Indian society has been relegated or been left behind in debate in the global academia, starting from the independence era. So these are few concerns which perhaps sets the stage, which perhaps sets the tone for what is going to follow after this. Okay, now my concern here is with another idea which plays a very, very important role in bringing Dalit literatures to the forefront, in bringing Dalit literatures from the margin to the center. And that is the existence of Dalit literary criticism. So Dalit literary criticism. Now, there have been enough Dalit writers such as Sharan Kumar Limbale, there is Vasant Mohan, and there is Om Prakash Valmiki from the beginning. So many of these, and Arjun Dangle for very importantly, they have been writing, they have been, debating what is, the literary value or what is Dalit literature or about. Is there a literary merit in Dalit literature? How do we, approach Dalit literature? Do we use the same, critical criteria for Dalit literature that we use for the rest of the Indian literary canon, so on and so forth? So there have been a handful of Dalit literary theorists who have been trying to give their own critical Dalit perspective. So there are two things here. One is the writing of autobiography, poetry, testimonial writing, which is work of literature. Then we have literary theory or literary criticism, right, which is going to deal with questions of what constitutes literature or what is so unique about a specific work of literature. So what we are concerned here is with the existence of critical literature for and by Dalits. So So if we were to, and as we have seen, there's one thing for us to be concerned about is that there is no proper space for Dalit literary criticism as such in the global stage. Why do we say this? Now, when we speak of subaltern studies, we speak of post-colonialism. Now, the fact that people were colonized and the fact that people, there were colonizers and the colonized has turned itself into a movement, which is post-colonial theory. Whereas when it comes to caste, has it really received this much attention worldwide? Obviously, there have been parallels between African American Black feminism, African American literature, and caste, and so on and so forth. But has it become the same? Is there something called global caste theory, or so on and so forth? Or caste is something which is very specific to India? So these are few questions for us to worry about. So a movement, a political and literary movement, which is very important for the present day Indian national identity. So it penetrates everything, day-to-day life, politics, society, every social discussion. Has it received enough, enough space in the global academia? Just give me a second. I need to turn on my charger. So, so this is exactly where we are going to start our inquiry from, and our question is going to be concerning the aesthetics of Dalit literature. Is there an aesthetic for Dalit literature? Why do I ask this question? And in this, I wish to draw upon largely from the work of Sharan Kumar Limbale, which was titled Towards an Aesthetic of Dalit Literature. So now it is for us to decide that in his work, what he says as towards Dalit, the aesthetic of Dalit literature, have we reached that aesthetics of Dalit literature? Has there been an aesthetics carved out for Dalit literature or not? So as far as I can see, as far as I'm concerned, this question concerning the aesthetic of Dalit literature can be laid out in three formulations, or you can say that it has three concerns to deal with. The first concern is, obviously these concerns are in the form of question. The first concern is, what is Dalit writing, or what is Dalit literature, and what are its concerns and features? Now, this question is not very difficult to answer, because many of the Dalit literary theorists, writer, activists have tried to answer this for us. And Sharan Kumar Limbale is again one of them. So I'll just read out a line of his definition that he gives. That's all. It's a very strict definition. It says Dalit literature is writing about Dalits by Dalits with a Dalit consciousness. So as we can see, it sounds like a somewhat strict definition. It only includes people who have authentic life experience of being Dalit, as well as it includes something to do with Dalit consciousness, right? So it's writing by Dalits and about Dalits and captures Dalit consciousness. Now, in the discussion surrounding Dalit literature, often this question is asked, what is a distinguishing feature or concern of Dalit literature, right? What does it concern itself with? So there's often a relationship of complementarity or interrelatedness established between literature and politics when it comes to the Dalit question. For instance, Sharan Kumar Limbale, Sharmila Rege, all these Dalit writer activists suggest that somewhere Dalit literature is supposed to serve a different purpose, and that is a political purpose. That it's supposed to give a sort of political consciousness to the Dalits who are reading it, who are writing it. At the same time, it is going to lay an ideological base for the overall political struggle, for a strong political identity for the Dalits. So in this case, literature has sort of become a handmaiden of a political movement. So the written word is serving as a larger political cause. So somewhere literature is subservient to politics, right? So it's somewhere serving as a catalyst for politics. So, and at the same time, Om Prakash Valmiki, the renowned writer of his autobiography Jutan, argues that literature somewhere sets the ideological foundation for political struggle. So could it be that Dalit literature is something which is a vehicle for the political, political advancement of Dalit? Now, all these things, all these observations, all these, assertions are somewhere debatable in their own right. But for now, let's move forward. So as I said, when we ask the question of towards an aesthetic, towards an aesthetics of Dalit literature, or we try to locate or carve out an aesthetics for the Dalit literature, there are three questions to take into account. And one of them we have somewhat addressed is what is Dalit writing and what are its concerns and features. The second question is interlinked with the first one. The first one we saw, Sharan Kumar Limbale says that Dalit literature is that which is written by the Dalits, right? The second question arises for us is who can write or theorize about Dalits? So this is a question about authority and authenticity. And in this case, I mean, this insider-outsider point of view is something, insider-outsider viewpoint is something that we encounter when we study different cultures, indigenous literary traditions, indigenous cultures, when we in any case, this insider-outsider point of view has been at the forefront, even for the African American literature. The same thing with insider-outsider point of view was again evoked. So, so this is a question about whose voice is a legitimate voice in Dalit literature. Is there a moral right or wrong when it comes to who has the right to write about Dalits? So the question here is, of course, the issue of writing on or from a Dalit perspective, right? Either you are writing as a Dalit or you are another person writing for Dalit. So in this case, a very important, a very important as well as a very fairly lucid work is Sundar Sarukai's Intervention, which is just a small article that he published some time back for Economic and Political Weekly, where he was presenting his colleagues Gopal Guru's views. And Gopal Guru is one among those people who follow this trend, who believe that, obviously, not just believe, argue that, that it is only the Dalits who can write authentically about their experience. So it is possible to have a moral right to write. It is possible to have a moral right to theorize. There are some writings which are going to be more authentic than others, right? So this raises again a host of questions for us, right? It's raised another question, that does the caste identity of the writer define them as a writer in first place? This is one of question. And obviously we can debate, is it possible to have a moral right to theorize, for instance? So it's always interesting how I come to think about this, that when we say, does the caste identity of a person make them the writer or make them a writer in a specific literary canon? For instance, someone like V.S. Naipaul or R.K. Narayan, do we call them Indian writers, or do we call them writers of Brahmin literature? So these are few points for us to sort of contest and worry about. Why should, Dalit literature be given, for instance, its own separate, unique place? What is so unique about Dalit literature that it should be given a sort of unique, separate place? At the same time, does it in any possible way require a different aesthetic criteria? Does it require a different assessment criteria? So with this, we come to the third question, which is, what is the literary value of Dalit literature, which deals with the reception and critique of Dalit literature, right? So many a time, just give me a second. So as we just saw a little earlier, that in many ways, these Dalit literatures are identified as a catalyst for political change. So they are seen as sort of, the writing of Dalit writing is seen as that sort of tool to bring about social transformation, to alter the society, make it a more humanist society, make it, a more dignified society. So in this way, we think of Dalit literature as a literature which is valuable because it brings about certain social reforms. So many a times, for instance, like Sharan Kumar Limbale, whose work I have been constantly drawing upon, he says the aesthetic value or the literary value of Dalit literature lies in the fact that it's a literature of social reform, that it has power to comment upon the society and bring about significant changes in the society. It has a power to make, it can serve as a catalyst to bring about a humanistic change in the society. So we also have to remember something here, that if we only try to understand Dalit literature as from a sociological or political point of view, a strictly social point, that its purpose is sociological and political, we are somewhere keeping aside one very important aspect which is common to every literary work, and that is its formal properties, for instance, right? What are the narrative techniques, let's say, the author has brought into use? A very interesting example would be this novel. If there's hasn't read it, I really encourage you to read it. It's in Tamil. Obviously, I've read the translation. It's by the Tamil writer Dharman, and it's titled Kukai. It means owl, and it's really difficult to recreate. There's an entirely different narrative technique where there are two parallel narratives going. There's also a character of owl. It somewhere tends towards magical realism, so on and so forth. So it's an imaginary world in itself. So on one hand, it's narrating a real life Dalit experience. At the same time, it's bringing some kind of imaginary elements, some kind of fantastical elements which are found in so many works of literature. So somewhere in every work of literature, there's something involved. It's not documenting the experience, a real life experience as it is. It's a sort of impactful, powerful articulation of, certain real life experience. So, and in the process of that articulation, an author is going to bring certain formal elements, the choice of narrative technique, the genre, for instance. Punjabi Dalit writers preferred poetry, right, which could be sung. Gujarati Dalit writers preferred to begin short stories, right, which they found more impactful. The choice of genre, choice of, narrative techniques, how the narrative is, distributed over time and space. Is there, certain kind of techniques, let's say, borrowed from different cultures, so on and so forth. Now, these are certain considerations which are separate from the politics of a text, from the political concerns of a text, right? So insofar as we need to, analyze these texts as social, addressing certain social concerns or paving the way for larger social reform, we also have to see them as works of literature. It's also interesting, if someone's interested, I don't know, there's a graphic novel by the name Gardener's Wasteland. And it draws on Ambedkar and Jyotirao Phule's work.
So moving ahead, we have been discussing the literary value or the literary merit of each and of Dalit writing. Is there a literary merit? Now, in this, there is an important concerns which come into play. Can we use the same literary criteria that we have applied to all other works, let's say by other Hindu upper caste writers or other writers across the world? Can we use the same literary merit or literary criteria for Dalit literature? Can we do that? And in that, there is one significant stream of thought, an opposing stream of thought that we encounter is that we can never read Dalit literature, perhaps a Dalit literary work which is testimonial life narrative, which is testimonial in nature, from the point of view of an aesthetic criteria which values pleasure. It can never be possibly a pleasurable, aesthetically enjoyable experience to read Dalit literature. Right. Now, in one sense, we can perhaps, make sense of this opposition. And why? How? Most of the, when we speak of, for instance, traditionally speaking, the rasa experience, it has often been translated as aesthetic relish or aesthetic pleasure, enjoyment. That when we read literature, there's some kind of repose and relief. And in Natya Shastra, the first chapter itself, where they speak of genesis of Natya Veda or the drama, there itself they speak of that how a good theatrical performance can induce relief and repose in the person who's watching it. But when it comes to Dalit literature, if we go through these life narratives, which are full of wretchedness of that existence, there's humiliation, there's pain, exclusion, grief, unfair treatment, a narrative which is pervaded by such painful experience, can it possibly give you pleasure? If not, should the subjective viewer's pleasure be the criteria for Dalit, for judging the literary value of Dalit literature? Another point in this to be included is the fact that most, if you refer to Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable, for instance, the protagonist his name is Bakha, and he's a sweeper. His job is to sweep urinals, latrines whole day. And he and his brother and his father takes turn to do that. And most of these episodes, anecdotes from the story are the ones where Bakha is somewhere surrounded with filth, and he lives in filthy conditions. He lives in dirty, unkempt houses. He goes and clean other people's he waits for other people to give him their leftovers. Leftovers form his meal, so on and so forth. Right. So most of these narratives will be found, even for that instance, Jutan, Om Prakash Valmiki. Jutan itself as a word here means leftover from food. But there's certain aspect of Jutan which is not captured in leftover as an English translation. You know why it's Jutan? Because it's Jutan if another person has to take it. Like a mother would possibly never tell her child. She would say, "This is ye mera jhootha hai, don't have this," right? But when it comes to these people on the margins of the society, they used to wait for leftover food. That used to be their food, right? And they were supposed to throw off the waste. They're supposed to live with waste and survive on that waste, right? So whenever we speak of aesthetic pleasure, it can really never be a possible criteria for judging the literary merit or the aesthetic value of literary work, which is of Dalit writing. So in this one way, there has been a need for another literary aesthetic criteria for judging the value of a Dalit work. And what that literary criteria could be: people such as scholars, writers, activists such as Limbale, Sharmila Rege, and Suraj Bhartia's work on Hindi work on Dalit aesthetics focus on finding a sociological relevance for these Dalit works, right? But then it leaves us with certain questions. If we are unable to place my question is, if we are unable to place the literary value of an artwork on the subjective response of the viewer, where should we place it? Should it be entirely placed in the experience and the intention or the creative genius of the author? Now, in the discipline of aesthetics, we encounter this question time and again, Indian and Western alike, that what is the art experience like? So, for instance, let me give you this example, is that we are watching a play. It could be anything, Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, or Romeo Juliet. Let's say you're watching Romeo Juliet, and you're watching that, and while you're watching it, you feel love, right? You're able to recognize love as an emotion, and you feel love. Perhaps you're weeping with them, or perhaps you are laughing with them, right? There's something comical happening there, and you laughed. Now, the question here is it is this response that you felt, this emotional response, love, comical, anything, or grief, is this response your own grief? If yes, then how come you are not at all related to the characters? You are completely unrelated to them. Then is this the grief or the love or emotion among the characters, right? They might not know them. They might not even be friends. They are just stage actors. Then is this the love and grief of the author who has imbued it in, or the dramatist who has imbued it in the play? Right? So there's this, and the whole entire history of Indian aesthetics, the classical Sanskrit aesthetics, is somewhere revolving around the different answers to that question. There will be scholars saying that it is the author's creation, it is the textual creation, the properties of the text, and then there will be reader-centered aesthetics of Abhinavagupta, who would say it comes from the reader. Now, moving on from this, so if we have not placed the literary value or the relevance of Dalit writing in the subjective response of the reader or the viewer, can we solely place it in the life, in the experience, in the authentic experience of the writer creating it? Now, there is a certain concern involved here, and let me lay it out in a precise manner. If we say that a literary work such as Dalit writing, an autobiographical writing, a testimony, most of these poetries also were to a great extent based on real life instances. So what the concern is that most of the Dalit writing is somewhere, very autobiographical, or life based in nature. These are works inspired from real life. So should we place the aesthetic significance or literary value of a Dalit work on the fact that it is inspired from the real life experience of the author? Now, if that is the case, should we say, how can we say that a non-Dalit reader is going to relate with the Dalit experience of a Dalit writer? Is it possible for a non-Dalit reader to relate with a Dalit writer? They come from different life worlds. They come from different experiences. It's perfectly possible that a person reading a Dalit work is from the upper caste family, right? In that sense, what happens? Do they cry along with that testimonial writing? Are they grief-stricken? Are they ashamed? Or are they simply uninvolved? Right? Now, if you say that, you can read a work of literature and not feel anything about it, well, I would say we cannot say that literally about Dalit writing. If we are saying that Dalit writing, is inaccessible to readers who do not have first-hand Dalit experience, we somewhere have to agree that, this literature has not at all brought about any change in the society, which is not true. Even if there are dark spaces, even if the sunlight has not reached all the groves, there has been a change from when we were, let's say, in the post-independence era or in the ancient medieval India than where we are today. There has been some recognition, there has been some sort of advancement. however limited that is. And that is somewhere testimony to the fact that these Dalit writings have brought about a change. They have impacted even a non-Dalit reader, at least to an extent. So if you look at it closely, this question is somewhere related to this question that we had earlier. Can non-Dalits theorize or write about Dalits without having first-hand authentic experience of them? Can non-Dalits write about them? So now our question is, can non-Dalit readers relate with Dalit writers? You see the play of, this is what we call intersubjectivity. And that's perhaps the sole reason why I ended up naming this as aesthetics of intersubjectivity. It's not the question entirely of Dalit or non-Dalit. It's also a question of different subjectivities or different subjects and their personalities per se. Now, when we speak of intersubjectivity, intersubjectivity is, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but will you be winding up in another 5 minutes?
Yeah, I'll be winding it for 5 minutes, right? Okay. So, yeah. So moving on, this is where we bring up the subject of intersubjectivity, and it is a very important philosophical concept, and I won't be venturing into this in a great detail. But know this one thing, that intersubjectivity is the intersection or the relationship between two conscious minds, right? Two subjects who are interacting with the world, living in the world. Now, there is a certain problem with intersubjectivity, which forms a major problem in philosophy and ontology, is that I have direct access to my experiences, right? I know what I'm feeling, I know what I'm thinking, my thoughts, but do I have the same direct access to, let's say, Richa's thoughts, let's say Benil's thoughts, right? I do not. I have nothing but a mediated second-hand experience of who they are. I'm possibly judging from their facial expressions, from their bodily characteristics, from their behavior. So how is that we enter or relate with the subjectivity of another? How is that we make sense of the subjective? So for us, the kind of aesthetics that should be carved for Dalit literature has to account for the fact that art can be an intersubjective phenomena. Or Dalit literature calls for a different kind of aesthetics, which takes the form of intersubjective aesthetics, where we see art as a sort of dialogical process, where the interpretation or judgment of the literary value of a Dalit writing is not entirely dependent on the author's real life experience or the subject's identity as a Dalit or a non-Dalit. It is an interplay of both the subjectivities, and any account of Dalit aesthetics has to somewhere explain literature itself, art itself, as a communicative intersubjective phenomena. So with this, I think I rest my case. There were a few things that I could have said and could have added, but some of them skipped my mind. Some of them possibly I had to discard in the process of reaching a certain point, so on and so forth. But I think we can take questions now. Okay.
Thank you very much, Tanima, for the very engaging lecture and leaving us with the whole host of questions, which perhaps we can take up now, maybe collectively try to think of, and let's see how everyone have to pitch in with that. Just to quickly highlight some of the main essential and more crucial questions you've raised. One is, I think, foremost, is who can write Dalit literature? And before that, of course, what is Dalit literature? And when we ask what is Dalit literature, who can write this literature that is termed as Dalit literature? Another question which you touched upon, but which perhaps a little more elaboration would help, is what constitutes Dalit literature? I mean, is it just about humiliation, pain, suffering, or about lives of Dalits in different ways? It is also a literature of assertion. Limbale talks about it, many other writers, theorists have talked about it. It's an assertion. It is, of course, a movement that is moves towards away from a certain lived experience, a movement against that particular experience of that particular structure which imposes that experience, right? Another question is, how do we critically analyze? What is the critical framework with which we look at this literature? Certain things, questions that I would want to ask, and we can open the floor to other questions from others, is when we ask about who can write Dalit literature, if we do not accept the answer that someone who is Dalit, who has a Dalit consciousness, right? That is essential. Someone who has a Dalit consciousness, because it is a certain identity that someone possesses for himself, herself, themselves. When that particular person is writing, that is Dalit literature. If this is not something that we readily accept, could we apply the same doubt to other literature, say women's literature, okay, or African American literature? Who is this person who writes this literature? If a man or any other gender person is writing specific literature about women, does that constitute women's literature? Okay, and I'll come, since often there are parallels drawn between African American literature and Dalit literature. So what is African American literature then? Does it have to be an African American person who's creating African American literature, or is it the subject itself that would create African American literature? I do have some more questions, especially vis-a-vis when we talk about intersubjectivity, because especially the previous two lectures we did touch upon this question of the self and the other, and how this difference is mediated, the difficulties of mediating these questions. But perhaps let us open up the floor to other participants. And Tanima, if you want, you could respond to this, or we can collect some more questions and you can respond to them together. Tanima, how would you like to proceed? Do we collect more questions first?
Yeah, we can go ahead, collect more questions. Plus, I would like to speak about this, of course, is that this question that we have asked in, while everyone posts their question, if there are any, or forms their question, these questions that we have asked, that anyone who belongs to any other gender, this question has been asked before as well. Can you write, let's say, a queer story if you are not yourself queer? Can you understand a queer experience if you are not queer, for instance? There's obviously, there's no one right way of answering it, and there's going to be, varied views from all ends. But there's one concern that always comes to my mind. If we somewhere deny that, a non-queer is, if we say somewhere, is incapable of understanding what a queer actually feels, or even is unable to have a sort of empathetic understanding, right? We are somewhere denying that no literature makes sense to anyone, because at the end of the day, a text is a communication. The moment I am sitting, let's say, in India and reading Dostoevsky, it's an entirely different socio-cultural milieu, right? And that's a very different character, an unreliable narrator. I'm a very organized person. I can never possibly relate with him. Why, Raskolnikov is such a person, he's hiding from his landlady. But yet it makes sense. Yet I respond to it. Yet I always, sort of resonate with it. There's some kind of connection. The moment we say that someone who is, who doesn't have an authentic experience, the question here becomes, what counts as authentic? And it's possible there have been people who have been, for instance, if we take this example, since we have been speaking about Dalit literature. Now, Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable has received a lot of criticism based on the fact that he is a non-Dalit, he's an upper caste, who is Brahmin, who is writing for Dalits. So there are two things. Let us perhaps look at his work in itself and possibly keep his identity aside. Let's detach his identity, who is. Let us look at that work in itself. There are certain concerns in the character of Bakha for sure. As a protagonist, he has, we go through the book, we see, Bakha living through his day. So what we witness, what we are familiarized with is Baka's misery, misfortune, his, thoughts, so on. But the whole focus of the narrative is Baka, his grief, and so on. So somewhere, maybe it's not the accurate picture, but some kind of attempt has been made to document a work. And insofar as we are speaking of literature, all kinds of all kinds of perspectives are somewhere important. The moment we deny that a non-Dalit cannot theorize about a Dalit or cannot write about a Dalit, we're somewhere denying the fact that there is not going to be any understanding any day. An upper caste is going to be just, the biased, prejudiced upper caste. Somewhere we have to believe that in our experience of the world, there's also some space for empathy and self, and there's this concept called collective intentionality in phenomenology, right? Where we get together, like how we come together to, convene this winter school. We are working in one spirit. I understand what, your capacities are, you understand what my capacities are, and we don't really have to spell them out, and we're working together. Similarly, when cricket players are playing a game, it's possible all the team is in perfect coordination amongst themselves. So it's always possible for two different subjectivities to sort of coordinate, to cooperate, to have a sort of an intention, a V point of view at times. So I mean, yeah, if there are any other questions.
Thank you, Tanima. Yeah. Okay. Questions? Yes. We have Kanchan. Before Kanchan, can I just quickly read out Brahma? She's already put in a comment. She has said it was nice listening to you. Natya, as a matter of fact. Niyat is a doctor from the Lok Church. Thank you, everybody. Kanchan, would you please go ahead?
Yeah. So thank you for this lecture. It was very insightful. So I just want to ask that now we can see in modern times also there is little sensibility to, we have been discussing that insider outsider debate since yesterday. Maybe in during that those times in the history you did not have that much of sensitivity to understand the other, but now it's not there anymore. So how do you see that this fusion of horizons as far as hermeneutics is concerned, where you can understand the other, even get into their shoes? And do you think that we can construct those kind of frameworks where we are not dividing it is between philosophy, literature, Eastern, Western, then upper caste, lower caste, but I mean, given the technological reach also, it is possible to feel that other. Otherwise, it is impossible. If I hail from a certain class, you cannot say I have not gone through the operation that X and XYZ has been through. So I'm not the right person to write and comment on it. But how do you then justify that I feel for it?
True. So, what has been a task is to bring up such a literary theory in place which somewhere understands the universality that literature brings, the fact that we have a shared consciousness. At the same time, insofar as you hail, let's say, from a different cultural background, and I come from a very different cultural background, there's certain specificity also here involved. So when we speak of Dalit literary criticism, an ideal theory would be that sees it as literature sharing in certain qualities, characteristics that is common to all literary works or most literary works, at the same time adding on something which is very unique to it, which is why it ends up sort of revolutionizing the entire canon. It's because it has brought in something which was not there before. So how the question has been, how do we reconcile this political, social, cultural specificity with something that is universal or shared human experience or consciousness? So it would be a task to have such a theory. Hopefully phenomenological aesthetics and things that I'm attempting would be able to make it possible. Let's see. Yes, Brahmari.
It was nice listening to you, Tanima. So it was my first experience. So I'm sorry, my voice is not in a good condition today. What I felt about the rasa theory you expressed, can there be any other alternative to find out the rasa aesthetics of the Dalit literary work? I felt that the rasa theory prescribed by Bharata is self-sufficient, because that theory propounds mainly the sthayi bhavas.
Dominant emotional states, we translate them as.
Yes. So
Yes.
That's what I have put in my chat box also. So,
and in fact, if I were to just add on, a very good solution, I mean, this work has not been attempted before, but it's something that, we as researchers can attempt, is that Abhinava Gupta's aesthetics, which I had the privilege of reading with a very renowned scholar, I can see a lot of Abhinava Gupta's thought, which offers a framework of aesthetics that can clearly sort of accommodate our, our thoughts and our problems and concerns about, Dalit aesthetics. So, so this writer that I have been referring to, the writer activist Sharan Kumar Limbale, he's a Marathi writer activist. He has this specific. So in his book, he says that classical Indian aesthetics does not, have a theory to account for Dalit aesthetics. So that's a sort of a blanket statement that perhaps he has made that I don't agree with. But it's sort of a work in itself. It's a book in itself, how you apply Abhinav Gupta's theory to, Dalit aesthetics. I doubt it has been done before.
Because the Dasharupakas which Bharata speaks about, it is adopted from the Loka Charita. So Loka involves everyone.
That's in the opening verses of Natya Shastra, it says that, theater is something which, sings after Bhavanu Kirtanam, the essence of all the three lokas. So it's supposed to depict what all happens in all the three lokas as it is somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Tanima, for this very elaborate and thought-provoking presentation. One of the questions, the most important question you raised is how does a non-Dalit respond to a piece of Dalit literature? I think you have this term intersubjectivity in your title.
Yes.
And if you can extend it and you can reconcile this concept of intersubjectivity with the theory of Sadharanikarana.
Yes.
Because this question was asked by Abhinav Gupta and several other theorists. If somebody is playing the role of Rama, who is he imitating? Because Rama is not a real life person. He has not seen any Rama. So what he does is to embody the Sadharanikarana, some people translate it as universalization, but I would rather translate it as interpersonalization. He gets the interpersonalized, aspect, form of Rama, and he embodies that. That's how literary works which belong to totally different cultures and historical periods, they are closer to our heart than our own contemporary works. That's why I raised this question, why Karl Marx felt that Greek classics spoke to him with greater power than his own contemporary realist writers like what we call shouting Zolas and so on. So in great works of art, whether it's by Brahmin or Advait, whoever, there is this element of interpersonalization. And again, rasa is not pleasure. Not all rasas are pleasing. It's unfortunate, some people have translated the rasa to give that meaning, but that's not the meaning of rasa. Rasa is something else, and it can't be translated. We have to retain the same word. So rasa need not always be beautiful. Whereas, see, for example, an ugly experience in real life may not be beautiful, but an ugly experience, a bebas are depicted in a work of art, like the description of of the battlefield in Gadaita, for example. It can be pleasing to us. So rasa happens when the experience, pleasant or unpleasant, is transformed into something that surpasses the experience. That's what rasa is. So I still believe that if we use theory of rasa creatively, invoking this concept of sadharinikarana, it's possible for us to explain not only the impact of the literature, but any kind of literature. But there's another thing. Uh, what's the job of literary criticism? See, now a lot of contemporary literary criticism, literary theory is going too much into the sociology and politics of literary works. But in aesthetics, what we're concerned with is the impact, aesthetic impact of the work, where the sociology may not help us. It may shed some light on some of the aspects of the work. For example, somebody said even Shakespeare's laundry bills may tell us something about his works, but I'm sure that's not going to be the most quintessential thing about Shakespeare's works. So I think this concept of intersubjectivity is very useful, interpersonal personalization, and that's how we reconcile this problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. It's indeed a privilege to hear your educational response. So overwhelming. In fact, just to add on a little bit, if I may, it has always been confused that rasa in many of these English translation has been confused as a judgment of work of art, whereas rasa in all of its theoretical perspectives is speaking about the experience of the work of art, which is a little prior to judgment. As you in this tradition of phenomenological aesthetics in the West, they always distinguish between the primal engagement with the artwork, in which the subject participates and loses themselves, and judgment and theorization, good or bad, dislike, comes later. It's a second level involvement.
Yeah, rasa it only explains the impact of a work of art, and it's not nothing to do with the judgment of the work of art, which contemporary criticism is meddling with, which is entirely futile according to me. In fact, Northrop Frye, the Canadian critic, who was very influential in the 90s, he completely rejected literary criticism, and he said he was speaking of literary theory. In Sanskrit, we have Kavya Mimamsa, which is poetics. It's not criticism, for which we have no word in pre-modern Indian languages. In Hindi, they use the word alochana, and in Kannada, we use the word vimashe. But the Sanskrit word vimasha in Kashmir Shaivism, it means the self-awareness of the pramata, of the super, of the Shiva consciousness. So it's got nothing to do with critical judgment. But there's something that's come to us purely from the West. Even Aristotle was talking about poetics. He was not doing literary criticism, he was doing poetics. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor Shiv Prakash. Samvartha has something to say, and I think Binal, maybe we could take both questions or comments together and you could respond to them at once. Tanima? Yeah, Samvartha, please go ahead.
Benilda, please go ahead.
No, that's fine. We can anyways have a conversation later. That's fine. Samvartha, go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I do not have a question as such, but I have some, experience to share. I mean, of course, first of all, thank you, Tanima, for a wonderful presentation. I mean, I really liked it. And it actually kind of touched on a very, very sensitive part within me, because this is some conflict which I have myself been going through, because the question is very valid. Like, the authenticity. But the question will come, if authenticity is the thing, if the experience is the thing, then who is going to represent Auschwitz? Who is going to speak about Auschwitz? People who lived or died over there are no more. So, and also, I mean, the question that you brought in, okay, there is some strength to empathy. So all these questions are valid, but still, okay, I mean, caught between and pulled apart between these two, and also kind of, I mean, it's almost like, I mean, what Shivprakash sir said, like, I mean, caught between sociology and literature, almost something like that.
Yes.
Or even that binary also, I don't know. But let me say this one thing. I mean, I have, I mean, I'm speaking not as an academician. I'm not an academician. As someone who wants to practice and someone who also kind of is involved in some kind of training for practitioners, this is something which I have kind of have to deal with. I mean, the question of, okay, I mean, caste, representation, and how to. I'll just start with one small anecdote. Okay, when this happened in a long process of me translating the poems of Nagaraj Manjule into Kannada. Okay, I had to take the help of two people, and I'll not name any of them. Okay, one upper caste person in reading, interpreting, and all of that, and then I mean I found that, okay, I mean, there is some limitation in this. So then I kind of, I mean, with all my, I mean, what say, my sociological understanding, I was like, okay, this is caste. And then, okay, fine, okay, so this is limited. So I went to a Dalit poet and said, okay, now let me take your help. And then suddenly something very interesting actually kind of happened. Certain poems which had a undertone of what is a pity when the upper caste person was reading, kind of started eroding when the Dalit poet started, I mean, giving his reading. And a very, what to say, I mean, a forceful, revolutionary, resistance, rebellion voice, which the upper caste person couldn't actually kind of capture, was there in this other Dalit poets, this thing. And for me, who has engaged with every film of Nagaraj, I mean, in and out for my own purposes, I was like, these both are not the aesthetics of Nagaraj. Nagaraj is not someone who will slap you on your face. I mean, he'll shake you, but neither is he someone who will actually kind of indulge in self-pity. And that is the point where actually I kind of somewhere felt that probably ideology, I mean, especially, I mean, a political agenda, a political ideology can be also be blindfolding. May not be as blindfolding as caste, but it can also be a certain kind of blindfolding. And that is where actually kind of then actually, I mean, something got resolved when the discussion was happening with Nagaraj Manjule finally with regard to his poem. What I have also, in my experience of translating other Dalit poets also, what I've kind of realized, and also engaging with students, I mean, largely students coming from well-to-do background, not very caste conscious, and trying to actually kind of struggle with it. One thing which I've realized is that, I mean, why, I mean, especially, I mean, as much as it's true that, okay, I mean, this intersubjectivity and all of this true, that's, I mean, how to look at literature is one thing. How to engage with literature, I mean, how can a Brahmin read Dalit literature? Is it accessible? Is one thing. But I think there is also this question of, okay, I mean, not question, but something which I would call as the, I mean, not intersubjectivity, but as an individual being an intersection of identities, being intersecting identities. And I think, I mean, this is something which I have been trying to practice, and this is something which I've been trying to tell my students also. See, I mean, I am OBC, I am boy, I am a male, but not every time in my life I'm being an OBC person. I mean, I do not wake up and say like, oh, I am OBC.
No.
Nor do I get up every morning and say, Hacha, I'm an embodiment of patriarchy. No, I mean, when I'm talking to my sister, I may become a bit patriarchal. But when I'm talking to probably, I mean, Shivprakash sir is witness to this. I mean, when I went to Delhi, I was just a small town boy. I mean, the big city kind of shook me up. So I'm not being OBC. I'm just being a small town boy. And probably, I mean, in my romantic encounter, I might actually kind of become a very soft person. I become vulnerable. When I'm meeting my therapist, I'm something else. So, I mean, I am not just one, I mean, I'm not a monochrome. And what has really kind of helped me in actually kind of in my engagement with my students is that actually kind of trying to ask my students after screening Pandry, screening Sairat, the question I begin not by asking, do you understand caste? The question is, do you understand heartbreak? They're like, yeah. Okay, now where is this heartbreak of particular jabya coming from? Then you start tracing back. So I think this common point of connect is something which actually, I mean, probably that is one of the issue also. Like, when literature becomes a foot soldier of politics, then all you want to do is actually kind of push one, color ahead. I will not take any, it could be any color. It's not particularly about Dalit literature. It could be anything. But I think if you were to just speak of my experience as an experience where I'm not, of course, there will be a predominance of my Dalit experience in my life, but not at every point I'm being Dalit. And probably that is where actually the point of connects can come in. And it's not, and I'm looking at this not as an interpreter or a reader of the literature, but as someone who wants to practice writing. And in one of the conferences, it's a close reading group, actually, Gopal Guru said this. There is a competition of dukkha happening these days, which sounded true. And then he said, we should understand that we are all samana dukkhi. I had an issue over there. Saying that, okay, we may not be samana dukkhi. As an OBC, my experience will never be anything close to what Jabya sees or Nagaraj sees or Om Prakash Valmiki sees. But can we be sahadukhi? Can I understand someone else's pain through my own pain? Can I understand Jabya's heartbreak through my own heartbreak? And then through that heartbreak, can I actually kind of arrive at understanding to the experience of him in the caste circle? So the question for me is, okay, how do I relate to something else? I'm not interested in why Sundar Sarkai wants to kind of get into caste studies. My question is, what is the experience of Sundar Sarkai which brings him close to any experience of caste? Why does actually kind of an experience of gender discrimination brings you closer to an experience of caste discrimination? It's not the same, but it somewhere brings close to you. So then what is Sundar's experience? This, or any interpreters or any writers. And there can be something. And I'll tell, this one, I don't know, kahan se awaaz aa rahi hai?
No, this is probably, sorry, background from my
window. I'm really sorry. I'll say this, I'll conclude by just one thing. So I in some of my courses, I actually kind of make these students tell their experience. They introduce themselves to some episodes of their life. And I start the whole thing. So this workshop was happening in Kashmir, the particular one which I'm saying, and I narrated my experience, 2 episodes from my life. And suddenly this one boy actually kind of said, sir, aapki halat to Kashmir jaisa hi hai. And in a moment, actually kind of I realized why the issue of Kashmir has been so personal to me. I may not be a Kashmiri, but something in the emotional DNA of the experience that Kashmiris have gone through in a political scenario is something that I have gone through in a personal, social life, probably. So now, my question is, now how can anyone say I'm not Kashmiri or I cannot speak of Kashmir? Probably the question is not whether I can speak, by the Kashmiri or for the Kashmiri. I think can I speak with the Kashmiri? For me, that is the matter. And I'll conclude just by saying, quoting Faiz, "Bada hai dard ka rishta." Can we be sahadukkis? These are some of the thoughts that have been running in my mind. And thanks for actually kind of, you actually kind of touched a raw nerve with your presentation. And I'm really sorry if I've spilled over the edge, but thank you for bearing with me.
Yes. Thank you, Sambartha. Can we quickly take Bilal's comment before maybe? Sure, Bilal? I thought you had something to share.
No, that's fine. I was just really enjoying it. Thank you, Tanima, and others who contributed. And thank you, Professor Shiv Prakash. It's always so engaged. And I think now a lot of things made sense. And that's why I was commenting that what Sambartha said, that can there be a possibility of becoming a Kashmiri, becoming a Dalit? Maybe a re-engagement with the Natyashastra concept of Sah Hridaya has to be. We should not be just cut, copy, paste. Towards the end of Natyashastra, Bharat himself talks about, well, this was just one iteration. Maybe actors in future are going to take their own ways of engaging with the rasas and the methods that I've spoken about. So maybe we as Sahridayas have to re-engage. Maybe Sahridaya has to be reimagined, reinvented in our times. Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Just to add, Richard, just a moment. Just to add to what Binil Baba was saying, the concept of Sahridaya is very important here because Sanskrit poetry doesn't talk about the reader as much as of the Sahridaya. Sahridaya is the attentive reader who can, yesterday somebody said it's Samana Hridaya, it's not Samana Hridaya. One of the definitions of Sahridaya was Hridaya Samvada, to resonate with a work of art without totally identifying with it, at the same time without being too distant from it. So if you have the approach of Sahridaya, you can appreciate the aesthetic impact of any artwork, no matter which historical period or culture it comes from. Thank you.
Just one remark, finally. I mean, just give me a minute, okay? I mean, George Simmel has this essay called "Doors and Bridges." It's something which I refer to usually. See, I mean, of course, we may be two different islands. I mean, a river which is actually kind of separating us. But can we build a bridge? Okay, there might be a need for us to actually we all need our own identity. Hence, we build walls. I mean, when we are building a house. But there is a door which actually makes it possible for us to come in, go out, for others to come in, go out. So, I mean, is that possibility there? I mean, this is something which I kind of try to look at as in my own limited understanding of things. Thank you.
I'll just add one last thing to what Benil said. He says that we had to reinvent Sahirdaya. I really feel that we are already that. We have forgotten that. And once it is pinpointed, once you realize it, you're never going to leave it. That's how it is. It's sort of like moksha. It's very similar. Abhinav Gupta speaks about how the experience of art is sort of an elevation. It's bordering moksha. Anyhow, I think we can stop here because we have another session at 4 o'clock and this is supposed to be our break. So, yes.
Thank you, Tanima. Thank you to all participants.
Thank you everyone for engaging. Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you to the audience for keeping this session going so well. And once again, thank you, Tanima.